You are listening to Eastman's Flycast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? I'm your host, Brian Barney, Eastman's Flycast. This week we've got a great episode. So I've got my buddy on, Todd Helms from the Eastmans office. He also has on one of his buddies that I'm meeting for the first time, Sam Bailey, and it's just a great conversation. So we talk about, Sam is from the southern United States, and so we talk about some of the opportunities and experience he has down there, but really the conversation is centered around western fly fishing. He just got done with a trip with Todd Helms where he came out to Wyoming, and those guys just killed him. Good summertime dry fly fishing and just great insight into fly fishing in general. So this is a super conversation. Again, this is Todd Helms. He's my editor over there at Eastmans. He also has his own podcast. So he's in charge of Eastman's Wingman, and that's our wing shooting property that we have. They do a bunch of different videos and things, and now Todd has come out with his own podcast. You can find it under Wingman. I think they're still trying to decide on the title to get it through iTunes, as it's not the only Wingman podcast out there. So they're trying to figure that all out, but you can find it on SoundCloud right now, on Stitcher, on a few of those podcast playing platforms, and Todd does a great job with it. Super passionate about western big game hunting, super passionate about wing shooting, and super passionate about fly fishing. So he's got the trifecta going. Him and his buddy Sam have a great relationship, some good laughs in this one, and then just some great insight. So I really enjoyed it with these guys. I think you guys are going to enjoy it too. So we'll get right into it. I just want to thank Eastman's for putting on this podcast and believing in it, Eastman's Flycast. And so we're just trying to make this thing go. This is 21 episodes, and I just really appreciate the support and the shares by you guys. That's what makes this podcast go around. And so we're just trying to get this thing off the ground and rolling. I really enjoy doing it. I absolutely love catching fish on a fly rod, traveling around for all the different blue-collar adventures. So I just want to continue to bring you guys this podcast and next level information and good guests. So I'm going to continue to work really hard at it. But thanks, you guys. I really support it. And thanks to Eastmans for their belief in it and support of the podcast. Make sure to check out this week's Eastman's Elevated. That's our hunting-specific podcast. This week I've got a great one. So I call this one the Mule Deer Roundtable. And so I spoke at the Mule Deer Western Hunting Summit that Lampers put on. And so I got a bunch of these speakers together, put them all in a room, lock the door, and start talking mule deer. And so I've got Zach Kenner, Travis Nowotny. He's been on all of these guys have been on the podcast before. And then Dione Amuchastagi. Gosh, I always mess up his name, so look forward to that. I mess up his name in the beginning of the podcast, but I think it's finally stuck where if I think about it for a couple seconds, I can get it right. But I really like that guy. He's a great mule deer hunter and just a great podcast. So Mule Deer Roundtable, you can check out that this week on Eastman's Elevated. And yeah, check out everything we've got going on over there at Eastman's. It's just a great company. Great. We've got the EBJ, the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal, the Eastman's Hunting Journal. We've got that podcast, Eastman's Elevated. You can check out some of our videos, Beyond the Grid. It's our internet TV show that you just search Beyond the Grid on YouTube. A bunch of hunts will come up. I've got a few of my hunts in there, along with a recent one that they just released to it that was a high country mule deer hunt in Wyoming. It was actually the first videoed hunt I did in 2016. I teamed up with Lane Walters, a really talented photographer and videographer, and we put together this film, and you can watch it now on Beyond the Grid. Just search Brian Barney. Just search Beyond the Grid, and it should come up, but then Brian Barney, and you guys know how to use the internet. I don't need to give you step-by-step instructions, but check out that. Check out our TV show on the Outdoor Channel. It's called Eastman's Hunting TV. There's a great elk episode from last year, 2019, that I filmed that's in there. So you can check that out and look forward to more content from Eastmans, especially in this fly fishing world. I'm going to try to put together a blog. I'm going to try to do some more content and videos that I can release to you guys. So just going to keep working away at it. Again, I really appreciate the support. This is a great podcast. So let's get into this. This is my friend Todd Helms at Eastmans, runs the Wingman podcast, and then also his buddy Sam Bailey. I'm your host, Brian Barney, Eastman's Flycast. Here we go. Well, thanks a bunch, you guys, for taking the time. So Todd Helms, good buddy of mine from Wyoming, down at the Eastman's office. And then today we have Sam Bailey, one of his fishing buddies on. So, Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys have been getting some dang good fishing there out of Wyoming, Todd. I'm getting a little jealous of those pictures that keep coming through.
Well, I keep sending you invites, Brian, and you never come down. So fishing in Montana must be halfway decent too.
Oh, that's the truth. Yeah, you're gonna make your way over here towards this weekend, right? Throw the big
Yeah,
bug.
I'll be up there. Yeah, I'll be up there Thursday. I'm gonna load up my dad, and Thursday probably mid morning leave here, and it's about 3.5 hours to your back door, and we're gonna be staying right there in Ennis and fishing the Madison. So it's the magical time of year, man. If you're not on a piece of water in the West, you should be.
That's exactly it, man. Your
Keep telling
timing.
Sam that. Keep telling Sam that. He's down there in Georgia.
Hey Todd, if you have a really big bag, I might try to sneak in it.
So,
A really big bag. Yeah, Brian, Sam's like 6'3" and about 3 bills. So I need a big bag.
Come on, I'm only like 270.
just the small guy, huh?
Yeah, the drift boat rows downhill.
Yeah, how cool, Sam. So you're down in Georgia. Sounds like you just made a trip out here west, but that's where you're located is down south there, huh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Up in Cartersville, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, about 30 miles. Got a bunch of different options to fish down here, so it's not bad. I miss Wyoming a lot, but the fishing here is pretty good too.
A lot of warm water, right? A lot of bass down in that country, or redfish, or what do you focus on down there?
Where I live, we're primarily striped bass and bass in rivers. Of course, there's a ton of lakes you can fish all kinds of things on, but we primarily just focus on the different black bass species: spotted bass, largemouth, shoal bass, red eyes, and then we'll go and do smallmouth bass up in North Carolina and Tennessee. Then we love to fish the stripers when they run up the rivers. It's something else you're catching on the regular, 10 to 15 pound fish. And I got my personal best. It's been 2 years ago now, hard to believe, but it was pushing 40 pounds. We didn't put it on the scale, but all the measurements, said 40 pounds on it. So.
Jesus, Sam, that's a big fish. God dang.
That'll eat the trout that we catch, Brian.
Oh my gosh. So this is wild. So there's a bunch of still water that you can fish, but you prefer those rivers. Is that just because you like to fish the rivers more, or is it better fishing, bigger fish, or what's your draw to the rivers?
It gives you that traditional fly fishing mindset. You're in a river, we do a lot of drift boat fishing in these rivers, or rafts, depending on the size. And I don't know, there's just something about being on moving water. I just love it. I've fished plenty of reservoirs and lakes in my life and enjoyed those days too. Just something about moving water. Those fish are just a little bit more active. They fight a little harder. They're just special. So that's what I really like. Now, in reservoirs, a lot of times we'll go chase carp because who doesn't like to catch big, nasty, muddy rubber lips? So they're a lot of fun too. And we got pretty good carp fishing around here as well.
Wow. Todd, do you fish any carp? There's a lot of fly fishermen that love to fish them, like say it's the freshwater bonefish. I watched a video recently where they were sight fishing for them and trying to get these big carp to eat. Man, that looks like fun.
Yeah, they are a blast. They are super challenging, Brian. I've done quite a bit of it. Right here locally, we don't have. At least I haven't turned up any great carp fly fishing opportunities. We shoot them with our bows. When stuff starts flooding this time of year with runoff water, it fills up, and we'll shoot them with our bows. And those fish are so intent on spawning that I've had zero luck getting them to eat a fly. But when I have done it, the water's pretty clear. In a couple of reservoirs in eastern Wyoming, the water will be really clear, and you can see those fish for a long ways. They can see you for a long ways too, and you've got to drop that fly. I found that I had to drop that fly literally in a very small window, right in front of their face, because they're head down when they're feeding like crazy. They're usually head down, focused on what's right in front of them, and you've got to get that fly so it's right in front of them at just the right time. And in my experience, I never could feel them eat. I was always watching their body language. And when they got on my fly, I could see their little mouth work. And then I just kind of pull tight and they'd come tight and we're on. But we catch them in the rivers. And Dan Picard and I floated one of the local rivers a few weeks back, and he actually hooked one on a fly on a nymph rig. And he didn't stand a chance. It's probably a 20-pound carp on, 3X tippet, and he didn't stand a chance.
Yeah, that's wild. Huh,
It was
so
pretty fun, though.
yeah, I need to try to do more of that. I see guys doing it in like the lowlands of Colorado, like around the towns and things, and Utah, and then I think the video I saw was actually Montana where they were chasing them and just having a ball doing it and nobody out. It's kind of wild. Sometimes you can run into those fisheries that nobody's clued into and just have the time of your life. But man, that 40 pound, still can't stop thinking about that 40-pound striped bass. So that those striped bass, they must be like an ocean fish that run up these rivers to spawn. Is that right, Sam?
Well, way back before there were any dams, yes, that's kind of how they were. These are all landlocked stripers, so they stocked them in these reservoirs throughout the years, and they just through their habits, they still run up rivers out of the reservoirs in the spring to spawn. And a lot of rivers they don't actually take to spawning. Some of the fish that run to spawn actually can't spawn. But we have found also where they say they don't stock stripers anymore, yearling size, 2-year-old size striper, where they've not stocked them in years and years and years. So we know that in some rivers they are spawning, and those fish are, we're seeing the new fish come out. So, but that's what they're, before dams, yeah, they would run up from the coast up these rivers as far as they could to spawn, just like the salmon, steelhead, and everything else. But now it's just more of I guess it's just ingrained in them.
Man,
Yeah.
well, and excuse my ignorance, I just trying to picture what a striped bass is. So it's a striped bass and a redfish are different, right?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay.
So a striped bass, it's just like the saltwater stripers you see out, like on the East Coast, people fishing up in Massachusetts, and so they're long, they get really thick, they're kind of a silver with black lines down the side of them.
Okay. Yeah, I can picture it. I know what you're talking about now. Okay. And those man, those rivers that you're fishing down there, they got to be some pretty aggressive, fun eats, whether it's a striper or whether it's a bass, which I know are super aggressive fish. That bite has to be pretty fun. I'd imagine you're pulling big streamers for those things.
Yeah, definitely. Pulling streamers and top water. A lot of times we'll get the bass, the spots in the largemouth and everything on top water, or poppers, boogle bugs, things like that. Um, and that just gets better as the summer gets going into the early fall. The just topwater fishing just explodes. But the stripers, you can catch them on topwater, but primarily it's a streamer. It's a streamer game. So anything from, it's funny too because you'll catch them on anything from little 3-inch, 4-inch streamers up to 6, 8-inch stuff.
Huh.
Sam, haven't you? We've got a streamer out here, Brian. Sam and I won't say we discovered it. We definitely didn't discover it, but we started using it probably, man, 10 years ago when I first met Sam. And we laugh because we swear you can catch any fish that swims, just freshwater or saltwater on this streamer. And it's like when nothing else is working, bam, you throw that on. We fished streamers the other day when Sam and I fished together down here in Wyoming, and it was bright, sunny. It was the hottest day of the year so far. It was almost 100 degrees, and fish just wouldn't move on a streamer. But it got dark. It was getting dark, and we were moving, hunting heads, picking off rising fish. They were eating a little size 18 PMD right at dark, and we were just going rise to rise in the boat catching fish. We went through some real fast riffly stuff where they weren't rising, and I whipped out the streamer on that streamer, called a Goldie, and bang, hit a big brown immediately, like second or third cast on that streamer. We just started laughing. It's like, whenever you tie that thing on, it's game over. The fish are gonna eat it. And Sam, haven't you caught stripers on that thing?
Oh, man, I've caught. I laugh. We do laugh because I have caught literally. I can't name how many species right now I've caught on that fly, and it's so simple. It's the most simple fly there is. And
so basically, it's a woolly bugger.
Yeah, I mean, I've caught striped bass, spots, largemouth, smallmouth, red eyes. I've caught bluegill on it, big bluegill. Saltwater. I caught redfish, speckled trout. I caught a Spanish mackerel on it, a flounder. I don't know. I've caught a ton of fish on those flies. It's amazing how well they work.
Okay,
all the trout species.
I'm gonna need a dozen of those flies from you guys, definitely.
I'll bring you a couple, Brian. I started out years ago. Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was saying I even used them in Alaska and caught chum salmon, pink salmon, and what else did we catch? Anyways, that Dolly Varden and stuff. I caught just anywhere I've been, I've thrown that fly, and it works. It's amazing how simple of a fly. We get so tied up and got to do all this crazy stuff, and that fly works.
Man, what color is the fly, you guys?
Well, it's called a Goldie, and there's two versions of it, Brian. There's the regular Goldie, and all it is it's a white cone head bugger.
Yep.
But it's got the cone head is usually tungsten, and they're big. I mean, we're fishing them size 4, size 2. They're big streamer for a bugger. Yeah. And then they have gold tinsel as a body, and then white saddle hackle palmered all through that tinsel. So it's white and gold. They're called a Goldie.
Oh man, I like it.
There's another version. Yeah, and there's another version that is called the articulated Goldie, and it's the same thing, but it's 2 hooks. It's articulated. And if I could only pick one of those to use, it'd be the articulated one.
Yeah.
But honestly, when if I want to fish like a double streamer rig, I'll throw one of those regular ones, not the articulated. I'll throw those regular ones, and then I'll tie off a piece of 0X to the back to the hook shank and tie off something completely different and run a double streamer rig that way. And oh my goodness, we've had some pretty stellar days. But Sam's right, that fly has caught, I don't know how many different species for me too. Everything from mostly trout, because that's what we have here for the most part in Wyoming. But I have caught a carp on one, I've caught smallmouth bass on them, and I've caught northern pike on them. And so it's an amazing pattern. And they started out years ago. We found them at the Reef Fly Shop down in Gray Reef in Alcova, Wyoming, on the North Platte. And for a long time, man, he was the only one. Trent was the only one down there that was carrying those flies. And now you can find them just about anywhere. I think one of the big companies picked up tying them, and you can find them just about any place. But I've got a handful, Brian. I'll bring you some.
Yeah, just one. I'll copy it. I'll find it. Man, that's awesome, you guys. It's just so amazing, like these patterns that we find. And this goes for patterns with dry flies, with nymphs, with streamers. You just find these patterns that these trout just like and eat. And it's like you can fish something real similar to it and they just won't touch it. But it's that fly that has movement and has life. And that white is such a great bait fish color. So it makes sense why you'd catch so many different fish from saltwater to freshwater and so many different species. Like it just sounds like a really good bait fish imitation. And then it's got a lot of movement and life to it. So it just looks real. And those fish just can't help themselves. And I love that gold color, by the way. I've got a green and cold. I can't remember if it's the Peanut Envy or the Silk Kitty or which one, this articulating green. But I can throw a bunch of green streamers in. But I just have that one, that Peanut Envy that has so much movement to it, so lifelike, and those fish just eat it. Big brown after big brown I catch on that thing. But it's amazing how we have to try out these patterns, develop them, and then you kind of find your preferences. And then once you find your white fly, I don't try too many other white flies. Like I've got my white fly that I stick on that catches fish, and just have confidence in it, you know. But it definitely sounds like you guys have that fly with that Goldie.
Yeah, and that Goldie's a lot like a peanut envy. I mean, it's built pretty similarly. It might be a little more sparse. The body on it might be a little more sparse than a peanut envy, Brian, but it fishes very similarly. It's really sleek. It's easy to cast all day long. You can throw it on a 6 weight, where you get some of those bigger bugs, big articulated stuff, man. You want to bump up to a 7 or maybe even an 8 on those, and at the end of the day, you've got a workout.
Man, that's the truth. Throwing that 7, 8 weight with a big weighted line on it all day and stripping back. Yeah, you're gonna feel it in your shoulder at night.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Ask Sam about fly fishing for muskies all day long and how he feels at the end of the day.
You feel like you've been beaten. Right after a whole long weekend or almost a week of it, it's almost not fun at the end of it. Especially because you don't catch muskies. So I mean, you're basically just out there watching fly swim.
Man, those muskies are tough, huh? It's this fish of 1,000 casts.
Oh yeah, it's 10,000. They're fun though. I mean, once you see that muskie come up and that big death eye looking at you, oh man, it's something else.
Man, I would say. Huh, that's crazy. Well, Todd, you had mentioned that things like a smaller pattern throws really good off a 6 weight. It's surprising sometimes, like it all plays a role. You've got your color, you've got your movement of your fly, and also size is a huge part of it. And I've actually done really good this spring kind of sizing down. There's so many guys throwing the big articulated bugs, and they work really well. I love them myself. But I started throwing this mini dragon, which is like this smaller, it's tied on a size 6. It is articulating, but just a way smaller profile, easy to throw. And those fish have been eating that thing up, just that little bit smaller size. I don't know if it represents the sculpin better or just throwing something different at those fish, or if it's just a really good pattern. But size seems to play a role. Sam, do you find that like on those systems you're fishing that size matters, or are you always throwing big at them?
No, it definitely does. In some years, sometimes it varies by year. I mean, we've even seen it where this year you might need to throw stuff that's up to 6 inches or more for the striper, because they're just keying on bigger bait fish that's in the river. Some years it's small stuff. Last year, I personally didn't find any fish on anything bigger than about 3.5, 4 inches. So fairly small flies for us. But we've had it in the years that if you weren't throwing something that had a big profile and 6+ inches long, it just it was tough to catch them, or any size at least.
Yeah.
Some of the small ones they'll eat whatever, but.
Todd, what do you find that in the systems that you're fishing, that size, and whether that's with a streamer or with a dry fly, that those trout really key into it, or can you size up on things?
Yeah, size matters. Size matters. Anybody that tells you different's lying. But that's a different road for another time. Anyway, no, yeah, Brian, you're absolutely right. I know, and I think I find that early in the season, the smaller flies tend to work better. Like what you said, what you found, the smaller streamers tend to work better when that water's cold, and those fish may not want to move real hard on something. And I'm not sure why that is, but it was the same way fishing warm water species like bass and muskies when I lived back in Michigan. Early in the season, I fished smaller baits and smaller flies, smaller streamers, and they just seemed to work better. Those fish weren't as interested in something big, and it was going to be a real mouthful for them. And I think honestly, when it comes to right down to it, I think guys fish small streamers better than they fish big streamers, because big streamers can be hard to fish. They're tiring. They're tiring to cast. They're heavy in the water. You may not get the rod English on a big heavy streamer the way you would a small streamer. I think guys fish them more effectively, I think they cast small streamers more accurately. So if you're talking about running down a bank from a boat, and it means the difference between a small streamer means the difference between hitting it in that bucket or that window perfectly versus missing it. Well, if you miss it with a big fly, that fish isn't probably not going to move to get it. But if you put a small fly right in there, he's going to eat it. And so I think it's casting accuracy. I think it's the ability to work the fly, and then what those fish want. Definitely early in the season when the water's really cold, I think small works better. That's what I've seen.
That's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
really good point, Todd. It's all about presentation, right? Putting that thing in the right spots and swimming it correctly. And you're right. You're just more effective with that smaller streamer, working it in and casting it to those right spots and swimming it around those rocks or swimming it where you need be. That's a really good point.
definitely. I see that a lot too. And like you said, early in the season, I think early in the season you find your bait fish that you see tend to be smaller too, because they're growing as the season goes. And that big striper I caught it on a little 3.5-inch shad pattern that I tied, and was actually fishing with a 6 weight for bass. Wasn't even looking for striper that day.
That must have been a handful. Holy smokes.
It was quite the show.
Those hot fish are so fun to tie into where you really got to fight on your hands on a fly rod. There's just nothing I like more.
Yeah.
They bend the rod different too. Like I hooked my best fish of the season like a week ago on the big hole on the salmon fly, and I had caught some fish that were 20 to 22 inches, 23 inches approaching that. But that 24 plus with that huge side and all that weight was just a different fish. I had that rod just bent over, and he almost controlled where he went, not me with the rod. I was just hanging on trying to keep control of things, but they're just a different breed when you tie into those heavy ones like that.
Yeah, we run into that. Sam hooked a brown with me when he was out 2 weeks ago, and we landed it. We put it in a boat. It was like yours, Brian. It was a 24, and that fish. I mean, he had good stout rod, and I think you had that fish. I think you had that fish on the point fly, and the point fly was running like 0x.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was beefy, heavy equipment, fast, super fast action, 5 weight rod, and that fish kicked your butt.
Yeah.
I was like, dude, get his head up so I can net him. You're like, I can't.
Yeah, he was digging. Every time you think he was coming, he started digging. Just pumping. So
Big
yeah.
broad tail and big heavy thick body, like you said, Brian. And they get that muscle working for them in the current, and you can't move them. I had a client back on Memorial Day weekend, and he hooked a big rainbow, and he literally couldn't do anything with it. And he was flabbergasted. He'd never, feel like, I catch lots of trout, I do whatever, and that's fine. But when you put them on, when somebody hooks, you're used to catching trout that are 10, 12, 14 inches long or smaller, and you skid them around, do whatever, and okay, yeah, that was fun, really cool. But then you start getting into those next level fish, like you said, Brian, and they are a different animal. And a big brown or a big rainbow, and I found you guys might want to throw me under the bus for this one, but I think those big rainbows fight harder than the big browns do. At least in the water down here in Wyoming, those big rainbows have zero quit, and they just they don't gas out. And it's almost like a big brown. You hook them, you get a couple big aerials, and they dig real hard for a little bit, and then they come right to the boat. And it's almost like they're like, yeah, take my picture, let me go. But those rainbows don't quit. And that's what that guy ran into. He hooked this big bow, and he's like, I can't move this fish. And he got done, and it ended up popping off. We didn't actually land the fish, but he had him on for several minutes, and he's sitting down like shaking out his wrist. He's like, man, I've never hooked a trout like that. And they're different. They're different. You hook those really big trout, and pound for pound, man, I think it's those big rainbows, especially, Brian. I think they're more like steelhead, than actual trout. The way they fight, how they just fight angry, and I know you've done a lot of steelhead fishing in the Pacific Northwest, and I've done a lot of it in the Great Lakes, and that's what those fish remind me of. You get in that 24 to 26 or bigger range on these big Western River rainbows, and you've got your hands full.
Yeah, you're spot on, Todd. Like, I get so hooked on chasing big browns because I love where they lay and how they eat, the
Right.
aggressive eats. And I don't think they just come in to get their picture taken, but I understand what you're saying. They're more bullies and like to hold down and like to kind of use their weight in the current, and they don't have as electric as a run. Like, you hook those rainbows sometimes and look out, they're just
I know.
electric. You can't even believe how hard those things are pulling. Or I love watching that line just rip upstream as they're running, away from the boat. You're right. Those rainbows are absolutely electric and so fun to fish for and catch. So I do love both species, and I don't know why I'm so hooked on brown trout, but I sure am. And man, Sam, that one you caught a couple weeks ago with Todd, that thing sure was a specimen. The colors on it and the weight and size of that fish, man, that was a beautiful brown.
Yeah, it was. It was, God, it was awesome. That's what I'll take any fish. I love fishing. I don't care if I catch big or small. I really don't. I just love being out there. But man, that fish, I really needed that fish that day. It was a special fish for me.
Oh, how cool. And then both you guys hanging out and teaming up on those rivers. You had talked earlier, Todd, about in the evening headhunting for those fish. And so when you're headhunting these rivers, you're definitely you're looking for dry fly eats and then targeting that fish, correct?
Right. We're just slow rolling. It's gotten to a point in the evening where the first part of the day we aggressively fished, and we were doing a lot of nib fishing with big ugly yuck bugs and rubber legs and zertles and whatever, doing just big ugly stuff, and then dropping what's coming off right now is a yellow Sally nymph or yellow Sallies, and then PMDs, and actually tan scuds. I figured that out, Sam, after you and I fished. I went back down, and because we had a little trouble getting in fish to eat. If they either ate the big barb or they didn't eat anything at all that particular day, until we switched and hit the dry fly action in the evening. But yeah, that's the program, Brian. We're just slow rolling, honestly, water that I think a lot of people don't fish during the middle part of the day, and those fish may not even be in the middle part of the day. It's deep, slow, kind of frog water, and man, in the evenings, those fish pod up in there, and they're sipping. Like, we found it was size 18 PMDs, wasn't it, Sam?
It was. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'd roll up and anchor the boat up just upstream, or if it was in a spot we weren't allowed to anchor, when just one of us, stay on the sticks and just hold the boat in place and try to get just above them, quite a ways out, because that water was pretty clear, and we found that if we got too close, we were spooking them and putting them down, but we had to throw a pretty good reach cast with a hard mend at the beginning, and then just let it go on a slack line. And they weren't real picky. If it wasn't dragging, they would eat it.
Man, that's really cool, guys. Okay, so you're in this frog water and you're going down and you're looking for rising trout and trying to probably differentiate like a smaller trout from a bigger trout too. Those bigger trout, it seems like they try to use the least amount of energy when they eat. I mean, sometimes they explode on it in fast water or if it's something they really want, but a lot of times it seems like in that frog water, they're just sitting in a line, and when they see that bug, they come up, barely break the surface and sip it. And you can almost look like for the tail of the fish,
Yeah.
or the wake, and kind of tell what kind of size. Are you guys doing the same thing where you're trying to size up these feeding fish on that?
Go ahead, Sam.
I mean, you know, for the most part, yes, definitely. You can see them, but there was so many big ones the other night. It wasn't nowhere to find them.
It was like every fish we hooked was a tank.
Yeah, I mean, everything we hooked was a a good big fish. I mean, over 18. You know, it was ridiculous. It really was.
Yeah, you can't hardly hold on to them. I mean, you're fishing. I'm fishing the heaviest tippet I can get through the eye of a size 18 PMD, which was about 3X, and you needed that tippet to be able to hold on to those fish. The water's got some moss in it floating down, and the longer you fight those fish, the more moss collects on the leader and goes right down to the hook, and that little hook doesn't take anything to pop out. So we didn't land near as many as we hooked, but man, we had a good time.
Yes, we did. You know, the funny thing is the smallest fish that we landed anything, came on the streamer.
Yeah, yeah. That was ridiculous. You'd think the streamer catches the big boys, but that day that fish was like probably a 16-inch, 17-inch brown,
Yep.
and that was the smallest fish we caught all day. And it's crazy. It's crazy. But that's why Sam comes all the way out from Georgia to fish with me, because he's got to get his fix.
That's it. I got to.
Yeah, it's really
I
cool,
don't get it
guys.
quite near enough.
So you're talking about like when you're headhunting these. So you see the fish, and then I'm sure you're looking around you to see which bugs are hitting the water or what these fish are feeding on, and trying to match that the best you can. And then you talk about the cast. This is what I love, because it's a high pressure cast, right? You row the boat over there, and the guy in the front, you're thinking about that cast the whole time, of how you're going to do it and how you're going to lay it in there. And then you have to execute it and not screw it up to this big rising trout right there. So Todd, you kind of mentioned that you throw that fly and throw the mend in the end. You kind of get a way that you're casting, where you cast that dry fly, and depending on which way the wind is or which way the float is, you're trying to land that fly and throw a mend in that cast, all in the same motion, and then throw it in that fish's line. Sam, is that what you guys were doing as you guys were hunting those things?
Brian, I'm going to stop you for a second. Your audio on my end's really garbly and bad all of a sudden.
Yeah,
Oh, is it?
It got here too.
Okay. Sometimes it cuts out, but it should be crystal clear on my end since I'm doing the recording. And both of your
Okay.
guys' audio has been crystal clear thus far. So I
Okay.
think we're okay with things. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, it just sounds tinnier now. That's all.
Huh.
I just don't want to screw it up, because we got a good podcast going here.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
There you go. That's perfect, Brian. You're clear as a bell.
Okay, good. It must have been something with the internet, or maybe my girl's using the Wi-Fi, or who knows. But what I was saying, guys, is I was talking about head hunting for those fish. So I'm sure you're paying attention to the hatches that are coming off. You know, which bugs these fish are eating, or which bugs are hitting the surface, trying to match it as good as you can. But this is the part that I really like, is these high pressure casts for these fish. So you row over to a feeding fish, and the guy in the front, you're thinking about your cast the whole time, but then you have to make it under pressure. And it seems like the cast for these fish, you almost like throw a mend in your cast as you're throwing it, or land the fly and then a mend in your line, because you can't reach around and mend a big or a small size 18, or it sinks. So you almost got to throw that fly and the mend all in one and try to get the line. Do you guys do a lot of false casting or practicing before you get there to get the feel for it? And then is that what that's like when you're head hunting those fish?
Well, I I don't false cast a ton, because I think I'll false cast to get to either snap water off my fly, obviously, dry that fly off a little bit so it floats nice and high, and to get my distance right. But honestly, I've screwed up so many fish by over false casting, because I pile the line up or it slips out of my fingers. I screw it up. So I mean, I might false cast once, twice, and then my shot's there. I'm in.
Yeah.
And honestly, Brian, my technique for that, for a reach cast for me, and I got to think how I do this, but on my forward delivery stroke, I finish my stroke, and then I immediately move my hand as the fly line is still in the air, still straightening out. I move my hand with the rod upstream. kind of parallel to the water, forward stroke, and then finish with a pronounced upstream movement. And what that does is it swings all that fly line out above the fly. So like you said, it's a delivery cast, but it's an upstream mend before that fly line ever hits the water. And there's a ton of YouTube videos out there on how to do the reach cast, and everybody's got to get their own feel for how they want to execute it. But that's just how I do it, and it's just that forward stroke, and then I almost in the same movement, I just finish with the rod pointed kind of upstream, and that just piles up, puts that line in perfect spot. I don't know how do you do it, Sam?
I get you to sprinkle a little fairy dust on it, and I just hope and pray. It happens.
It's that saltwater attitude. Just huck it out there.
No, I mean, I hate over false casting. I see people do it all the time, and I'm by no means trying to say that I'm a master caster or anything like that. I guess I'm average, but
you're just a huge fly fisherman.
Yes, I am. I'm pretty huge. But I see a lot of people just overcasting, and I don't know where they get it. Maybe they get it off of watching other people fishing, and they just cast all the time. I'm if I can pick it up and get the water off in a snap on the back and put it back down, I'm there, because I've got a much better chance of catching that fish if my fly's on the water versus in the air. I haven't seen many of them jump out of the air after it, but so I'm real quick, and yeah, you try to put a little mend in it upstream just to get your line there, because like you said, if you try to mend it on the water, it's sinking, and you're going again. But yeah, just I'm a minimalist when it comes to the casting. Like, just try to get there and let the current do the work for you.
And it's almost like a flow state, right? You can't overthink it. And maybe I didn't state that quite right with a false cast. So, like, I'm the same way. A false cast is used just to dry my fly off, and I'm sticking it right back in the spot. But what I meant by that is, like, when I'm head hunting a trout, I'll almost throw a little bit short to make sure I can get that mend on my line. And I like how you describe that, Todd, with kind of the roll of your arm or the point of the tip of that rod to get all that line to stack above that fly. But it's almost like you can't think about it. Sometimes it's extending your cast and leaving it out there so the wind can grab your line, or sometimes it's casting hard down at the surface. Like, there's all these different casts that you almost just have to feel. But what I meant by that false cast is when I'm head hunting, I almost throw on a shorter line for the first cast, make sure everything stacks up, and I'm almost a foot or 2 feet away from that trout. And then I get a good feel for the drift, and I know my fly went by right, and then I stick one a foot farther right in his line. So that's what I meant by the false cast. Not that I'm out whipping that fly around in the air a whole bunch, but when you guys describe it, that's spot on to how I look to catch those fish too. And you almost can't overthink it. It's instincts.
It's a lot like, Brian, you and I have talked a lot of hunting in the past, and that's our other big passion in life. But it's almost like instinctive archery or instinctive shooting a shotgun instinctively. Your body knows how much effort to put into something if you just let it do it. And like you said, the flow state. Man, that's exactly what it is. If you're thinking too much, you're gonna screw it up. You're gonna pile it up and blow that fish out of there. You just gotta let your body kind of take over, and just let your eyes lock on to where you need to put that fly, and I'm obviously generalizing here because I'm assuming that you've got the foundations of fly casting, that you have your fundamentals down, and you can manipulate a fly rod very well. If you can't, it takes more practice. But in the heat of that moment, yeah, if you're thinking too hard, you blow it. I know guiding, back when I used to guide a lot of wade trips, Brian, we would get in on fish where we could see fish in these small streams set up on a feeding line. And it was usually a big brown, and they were getting ready to huck a big stonefly pattern or a hopper or something like that in there. If those guys could see that fish, they without exemption, they almost all screwed up the first cast. They either stuck it in a tree or they pile the line up on the fish because they're thinking too hard. Their
Hey, look,
brain.
quit talking about me. I'm right here.
Me too. That isn't real polite,
Well,
is
that's
it?
all of us. That's all of us, though. I mean, we're all in the same boat there. You just got a flow state, man. I like that. I think there's another T-shirt idea for us, Brian. The first one was high def. Now we've got flow state.
Yeah.
I mean, just saying. You're spot on. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it is. You just don't think about it.
I like that too, that flow state. Um, so you're not trying to think about it, but if you had to put a number on, like, so you see that feeding fish and you're trying to throw above him so he can see the fly. Now, sometimes landing that fly right where he's at will get a strike. How far are you trying to throw in front of that fish when you're trying to fish to a rising trout where you know where he's at? Do you want to set up way above with the mend, or just a couple feet in front, or are you trying to land right on him, or what's your strategy, Sam, when you guys are fishing to those rising trout like that?
It depends on, it's all situational, I believe. It depends on what that fish is doing. If you got a fish that's just in one line and he's sitting up in that one line and he's steady coming up, then to me that fish is a little easier to spook. So I'll get a little bit farther, maybe 4 feet up. When you've got fish, a lot of them the other night, like what we had, they were not in one line. They were, here, they were a foot to the left, 2 foot more to the left, 3 foot to the right. And they were kind of all over just picking these bugs up. And so you got to get a little bit closer. And also, I don't think those fish are quite as spooky. And you can get a little bit closer to them, just, a foot or two up. Because if you don't, then they're gone. They're 3 foot to the left, 3 foot to the right, wherever of you.
Gotcha. And Todd, how are you trying to set up the boat when you guys are targeting these fish? Are you trying to get directly across? Do you like to be downstream? Do you like to be upstream? Or how do you like to position the boat when you're hunting these fish?
Brian, it totally depends on what the water's like. In a lot of the situations we faced the other night, it looked like the water was just frog water and not really moving much. But if you looked really close, there was always something diverting the current that the fish were holding on. There was a branch sticking off the bank that created a little seam line, or there was a rock shoal under the water on the bottom that's a point that stuck out that was all rocky that created a seam. And those fish always seemed to be on the inside of that seam. So you had you only had maybe a foot or two before that fly started to drag out of there because the fly is sitting in very slow, maybe even reverse current or back eddy water, and your line, no matter how much you stacked up, your line was still going to catch up eventually and pull your fly out of there. So in that situation, I like to get the boat above the fish so my fisherman can put that fly as much leader into that slack or back eddy water as possible to give the fish as much time as possible to look at it. Um, if it was if I couldn't discern a seam that the fish was holding on and it was just bank oriented off the bank, kind of tight to the bank, I'll get right across from them. But stay out, 40, 50, 60 feet. So the fisherman Sam had to make some pretty good strokes the other night to get the fly into some of those fish, but that was just the way it needed to happen, and it worked. I mean, so it's totally situational on how that fish is set up. Faster water, um, I like to get out and work fish in faster water. I think the boat is a hindrance, and if you've got fish in fast water working like a seam, like a current break or something, or a riffle line in fast water, and they're chomping away on caddis or sallies or something like that, I like to get out of the boat if I can, because I think I can position myself in fast water easier than working out of the boat. Just works better. So it's all depends. It all depends on what that fish are doing, how they're set up. But I'd say if 90% of the time, if I had to err on the side of one thing, it'd be above the fish, kind of angled above and to the outside, kind of offset a little bit. But I want that fly to float down to them as drag free as possible.
And then y'all got I know some of the places when I fished the Missouri, they like to fish them almost from directly above them and just let the fly go, drift right into them.
Right.
As opposed to, kind of cross current from them or.
Those fish up there are super picky, and those guys are fishing really long leaders.
Yep.
And fine leaders, and I know that, it's almost a perfect dead downstream drift because you're trying to eliminate any drag at all.
Yep.
Which I think makes it harder. I think it makes it harder to land those fish when they're that, especially on light tippet, when they're that far down from you already. That gets tough. You gotta be, if you're on the sticks. If I'm in the boat in that situation, I'm gonna be rowing, helping the guy out on the rod as much as possible, trying to catch up to the fish, and then get it at a 45 to it with the boat so he can work it instead of being dead downstream like a 90-degree angle.
Yeah, it makes good sense. That dead down below you is the worst place to hook a fish. They always come unbuttoned there. But yeah, I understand what they're trying to do. And so you'd mentioned leaders. That was my next question. Is a longer leader seems to give you more time until the current grabs that fly and drags it out of there. But still too, like there's. You want a leader to roll over your fly. You want to be able to be accurate with it and control it. And so for me, like I tend to fish about a 7-8 foot leader. What are you guys fishing when you're fishing this tailwater, Todd? Like what do you like for a leader length?
Again, Brian, it depends on what I'm fishing. Those PMDs the other night, size 18, size 20. If I'm fishing tricos, betas, the small PMDs, and we had two kinds coming off. We had big PMDs with like a 14, and the fish weren't touching those big old yellow battleships, man, and fish just wouldn't touch them. They wanted the little size 18, 20s. In that case, Brian, I like to run about a 10-foot leader. And down to 3 or 4X. If I have to go 5, which, man, that doesn't happen very often on the water that I fish here, I just hardly ever have to use 5X. 4X is just as light as it gets, even with like tricos. Part of it is anything lighter than 4X, and the fish in the one river I fish anyway, they're just super hot and they're big, and you just don't stand a chance on 5X. And when the water starts to get warmer later in the summer and like the tricos, you're fighting those fish so hard and you're wearing them out to the point where they can't recover. You might as well bonk that fish and put it in the cooler and take it home and smoke it because it's probably going to die. So I like to be able to put as much pressure on a fish as possible. So 3, 4X tippet. If I can get away with 2X, I'll do it. Obviously hoppers is a whole other ball of wax when you get into hoppers or big stone flies or stuff like that. But yeah, my standard dry fly leader is 10 feet. I go a foot longer than the rod and down to 3 or 4X. And if I'm fishing small streams where I'm wade fishing, I'll go shorter. I'll go 8 feet because a lot of times I got to punch a dry fly into a tight spot, and it's harder to do with a longer leader. So that's kind of my rig. I don't know. That's worked for me.
Yeah.
I've been in situations on different places, different waters where I had to go longer than that, and it's not enjoyable for me to fish a real long leader because those things get really hard. You get up to 15 feet or even longer in certain cases, and those things get hard to turn over.
Yeah. Big time.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yep, I like to have control over that fly. Man, there's nothing funner than watching those things come up and grab that. I'd imagine, Sam, that when you're talking that top water where you're at down south, that's got to be hard to beat. It's got to be so exciting to watch those bass come from underneath that thing and smash it like that. There's just nothing like top water. It is a lot of that stuff. Same thing where you can fish heavier leaders and heavier weight line as well.
Yeah, a lot of times we're fishing a minimum 15 pound. Sometimes we go down to 12 pound, but it's usually 15 pound. And with the poppers, you're not trying to most of the time you're not trying to make a delicate cast. You're trying to slap the water with that fly. Um, there are times where the fish are a little bit more finicky and they want a more delicate presentation. And when the fly hits the water, it hits kind of soft, and then you don't even pop it. You just let it sit, and that's when they take it. And a lot of times the bigger fish, just like a trout, they won't make as big of an explosion on that popper. I mean, a couple of the biggest bass that I've caught, whether it be smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth on topwater, have just it's been like a toilet bowl flush. I mean, literally, it's just water. The fly just disappears under the water. You don't hear anything, and it's like, oh my god, set the hook, and there he goes. That's just how those big ones. In fact, it was the week. I think the weekend before we headed out there, we did a little trip down on the lower Chattahoochee, and then went over to the Tallapoosa, and that's how it was. The big fish of the day on the hooch was I actually didn't land it. It jumped off right at the boat, but it was over 4 pound largemouth, and that thing just I saw the fly. He came up, just barely sipped it, and then the fight was on. He went crazy when I set the hook and just dug down deep, came up and jumped, and came off, which was fun. I didn't need a picture of him or anything, but it was an awesome fish. It was just sometimes they're like that. Now, if you catch those big ones on a streamer, they usually hit it with a ferociousness that's second to none for sure.
Oh, I love that streamer bite. Well, and so much of this that we talk about is so situational, and it seems like when you're out on the water, again, it's just getting into that flow state and trying to recognize patterns, trying to recognize how these fish are feeding or when you're getting them to eat, and then you tap into that. Or whether it's if the fish are getting spooky, I usually won't go to a smaller leader size. I usually like add some length to my leader, and that tends to solve it. But it's all about floating down and just theorizing and getting in flow state and trying to pay attention to what you're doing, what your buddy's doing, and trying to tap into the ecosystem and figure out what these fish really want to bite. And for such a pea brain on these fish, I sure think about them a lot and what they're thinking. It's crazy.
Oh, they just eat you up, and it's one of those things where you get. I, it's funny, Brian. Whenever I'm take the kids and the wife out, or last Friday I took my family out. Had my dad, my mom had never been in a drift boat, never floated a river, and so it's like she wanted to go, and then my oldest daughter wanted to go, and so I thought, yeah, immediately adjust expectations. Dad's gonna do all the fishing, and he's crowding 70 now, so he doesn't fish as hard as I do. But it's like you're right, you're rowing along, and it's like, man, you're pretty quiet. What's going on? And my brain is just spinning around. These fish aren't eating this pattern. They should be eating this pattern. What's going on here? It's like I get into like talk about flow state. It's almost like Rain Man state where I'm like, what fly? What I don't know what fly is going to work. I can't figure this out. And tan scuds, and yeah, I'm kicking over rocks and just beating my head against the side of my boat trying to figure them out. And then all of a sudden, like the other day, I figured it out. I pulled my 5-year-old is over playing in the water in this riffle, and she picks up these rocks and she's like, "Daddy, what are all these wiggly things on here?" And I went over and looked, and they were tan scuds, man. They were about probably a size 14 or 16 tan scud, white legs, and I went, I got to fly for that, and put it on as my dropper on my nymph rig, and immediately started catching fish. But I was running, there's yellow sallies flying all over the place. There's PMDs flying. I'm thinking, yeah, man, a pheasant tail or a sally nymph or something like that. But if you think about the etymology of those bugs, those sallies in particular, would be massive sally hatch. And the fish were eating sallies, dryflys, but it was real sporadic. You still catch more fish on the nymph rig on that day. But if you think about how those sallies actually, what their life cycle's like, they're crawlers. They crawl out. They're stonefly. They all crawl to the bank and crawl out on something and hatch, right? So when the sallies are hatching super thick, if the fish are eating the dry, awesome, that's what I'm throwing. But if they're not really eating the dry, not paying attention to it, and I got to throw that nymph, I bet there's not a lot of sallies actually in the water column unless the fish are right against the bank. Because if you're fishing riffles out in the middle of the river or holes or runs away from banks, those fish probably aren't seeing a lot of sally nymphs anymore like they were a week or two prior, because those bugs have moved to the banks so they can crawl out and hatch. And so the only thing that was really in the flow were those tan scuds. And holy smokes, I tied one on and it was immediate. Started catching fish. But I wasn't fishing tight to the bank. The run was out. All the runs were out away from the bank a bit. And Sam and you and I talked about it too, because that was the day that our nymph rigs just weren't producing the way they should have, and we had a great time anyway. But I think last Friday, I think I got onto something with that, and it was watching my little girl turn over a rock.
That's awesome. You know, it's funny is on the dries too. We were the same way. It took us 6 or 7 different dry patterns before we found what they were eating. I mean, there was quite a few heads we saw earlier in the day that we couldn't get to do anything. I mean, and we just kept changing until you finally found that one.
I kept going smaller.
Yeah.
I knew the color was right because of the PMDs. I knew we were on the right color with that sulfur style pattern. But I kept dropping, and I kept looking at the water. And a lot of times, Brian, I like to have like a little mesh net. And if I can't figure out what those trout are sipping because I can't see it, I'll stick that little mesh net in the water, a little white mesh net. And all of a sudden you pull it up and it's like, oh, that's what they're eating. And sometimes it's so small that I don't even bother with it. I'm like, I'm not going to go there. But that particular day with Sam, we could see different sizes of PMDs. And I just kept going, stayed with a PMD pattern, but kept dropping in size. Then we got down to the 18, and it was like a switch. All of a sudden, bang, every fish we cast to is eating.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's
smart. There was a lot of bugs on the water. I mean, there were PMDs and the sallies, and there were some caddis, and there was a lot of bug activity that day.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and I think back, Sam, about the sally note. When we first put the boat on early in the day, and we anchored up, and you waded up through this kind of right along the bank. Sam was getting fish to come over and look at his sally, the dry fly. He was fishing it dry dropper, and you were fishing a sally nymph below it, and they were all eating the nymph. But they were all within 10 feet of the bank.
Oh, yeah, in super shallow water.
Super shallow water. So those sallies are crawling out on exposed rocks to hatch or on the bank to hatch, just like the salmon flies do.
Yeah.
And I think that's what those fish that were holding in that water, they would eat that sally nymph. But man, you get it out in the middle of the river in a run, no, they wouldn't touch it. They wanted that tan scud, and that's what I figured out on Friday. And it's just kind of understanding how the life cycle of a bug sometimes. But yeah, I'm tore up with it, Brian. I'm obsessed, and I'm thinking about it all the time. My wife's like, "What are you thinking about?" And I'm a very honest guy. I learned a long time ago not to lie to my wife, and I'm like, "Well, I'm thinking about brown trout." She's like, "Of course you are."
It's so true. Yeah, adapt, evolve, and overcome. Like every day on the water, you just have to adapt and try to figure out what those fish are eating. They're eating something at some part of that day, and if you can dial into it, then you're probably going to catch a few fish. But man, just an awesome conversation, Sam. I've really enjoyed getting to meet you and have you on the podcast. We got to connect one of these days when you're up here north.
Yeah, definitely. I hope to get back out there at least one more time before the end of the summer and spend a little more time this time, all of it fishing, hopefully, or at least most of it fishing. And so maybe Todd and I can get up there and we can get a day or two on the water together.
Man, that would be awesome.
And
Todd?
if y'all are ever now, I've been trying to get Todd to come down here and visit me in Georgia for 7 years now.
I know, and I horrible timing, because about the time you moved, I became a family man.
I know.
And so I got little kids, man, and it is hard to get away, but I need to get down there and fish those stripers. I want to get out in in the salt and fish for reds.
Yep.
And I know you got some good redfish spots, Brian. Maybe, man, we should just do a road trip.
Look, y'all come. I mean, literally, we can fish some stripers and bass here for a couple of days. Take a 6-hour road trip, which is, I mean, that's a day trip for you guys out there.
Yep.
We'll take a 6-hour road trip down to the coast and chase some redfish and whatever else is biting. Get some good seafood and just have fun.
Man, Todd, we got to do it. Got
Yeah,
to take you up on it, Sam.
I'm game.
Right, let's do it.
Yep. Todd, you're the Rain Man of the West Coast.
Something like that.
No, you're a really good friend. I really appreciate your insight. You spend so much of your time on these rivers, and you have such a good understanding of trout and trout fishing and fly fishing. So, man, I just always really enjoy the conversations and look forward to getting together with you here soon and throwing that big bug.
Heck yeah, man. Absolutely. I appreciate the kind words, and I'm looking forward. I know we're not going to hook up this weekend when I'm up there, but maybe next weekend you and I can get together and get some time behind the sticks, because it's always fun to fish together, and I love it. I love it. And we get Sam out later this summer. I know that I missed out on some awesome hopper fishing up in your neck of the woods last summer because it was so good down here too. But and he comes out, we'll plan a couple days and we'll come up and fish with you, because I definitely I love fishing your rivers up there, and I like being in the boat with you too. It's a good time, and I always learn something. And yeah, we'll make it happen, man.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. We'll keep in touch and talk soon.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay.
See ya.
All right, guys. Fun conversation. You tell those two just absolutely love to fish. And so really fun to dive in depth and get some next level information out there, especially for that summertime fishing, which we're in the heart of right now. And I'm really enjoying. I've been so busy here, construction and obligations and a lot of irons in the fire here, but I've been able to manage everything, getting ready for hunting season here that kicks off in a couple weeks, but I'm still getting some of that good fly fishing in. So went to a new system on Sunday. Solo fish, just walked a bunch of bank line, caught them on hoppers, caught them on streamers. Just really fun. I had it all to myself. There's so many of these untouched, untapped rivers in Montana. I mean, there's the popular ones that are really fun to fish, and they're popular for a reason because they're really great fishing, like the Madison right here. And then there's also these less sought after rivers that just don't have the fishing pressure. It's so fun. So I fished that system Sunday, and earlier that week I had made it out to the Madison, caught some on hoppers. It's starting to heat up, maybe like hooked 8 or 10 or something like that. And then I'm getting calls and texts now that the Madison is going off for hoppers. So man, I'd love to like get out today, or I think I just need to get out after work here. I've got some podcasts tonight, but I've kind of got Thursday and Friday evening, so try to get out and throw some hoppers on this dang river while it's going so good, and then try to get out this weekend and get it a little bit. It's last weekend I have before hunting season kicks off, so and I'm gonna continue to try to fish hard in the fall as well. You know, being such a big game hunter, so passionate about big game hunting, I miss out on a lot of that late summer and fall fishing. And so this year I'm just going to try to mix, at least get a day a week in of fishing. I've got some new rivers I want to adventure towards. There's such opportunity for some giant trout here in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, and just really want to try to take advantage of it and share my journey with you guys. So thanks for all the support of this Eastmans Flycast podcast. Really helps me out. The shares, the follow on social media, the iTunes reviews. We're really tough to search on iTunes. So the only way this podcast is getting out there right now is by word of mouth. By you guys sharing it with your buddies or somebody seeing it in social media. I mean, you search these podcast platforms, fly fishing, and we don't even come up yet. We're just not established, haven't been doing it long enough, but we'll get there. And those iTunes reviews and ratings really help me out. So I appreciate that, you guys. Appreciate the support. And yeah, check in with you guys next week.